Okay, we'll get going then. It's just gone 11 o'clock, so thanks very much everyone for coming along to this session, and thanks for making it all to the conference as well. Just out of interest, who's from the UK who's here? Who's from mainland Europe? Who's from the US? Anybody made it over? No. Oh yeah, I recognised your accent earlier on actually.
Europe, so I kind of cheated.
Okay, so we're going to be looking at business connectivity services, what's new in this presentation. Feel free to ask any questions as we're going along, and hopefully we'll go through some interesting content. So, first a little bit about myself. My name's Nick Swan. I work with a company called Lightning Tools. We've done lots of work with the Business Data Catalog in SharePoint 2007, which is some tooling we built around that, which is kind of why we've been interested in the business connectivity services for SharePoint 2010. Our website's there, my email address is there, so feel free to email any questions that come up you don't get a chance to ask now. And I put down I seem to be a professional golfer. This is kind of a little dream of mine. If I don't put it down, then, dreams don't happen. So the only thing I've got in common with professional golfers is I've got one white hand and one red hand from where I wear a glove on this one. And my forehead's slightly lighter as well from wearing a cap. So I think that's where the comparisons probably end. So what we're going to go through in this session, we're going to have a brief history lesson. So kind of going through what happened in SharePoint 2007, what was made available to us, some of the hiccups we came along or problems that we came across that have hopefully been addressed in SharePoint 2010. We'll go through some acronym changes. So Microsoft love their acronyms. Not only have we got new acronyms this time, but we've got the same acronyms but mean slightly different things this time, so that helps a lot. We'll go through those to hopefully get us all on the same page. Then we'll go through some investments that Microsoft have made for SharePoint 2010 around business connectivity services and integrating your data, and then some demos as well. So, if you don't take anything else away from this presentation, I just put this in as a little aside. This book is really good. I read it a couple of weeks ago. It's called Start With Why. And it kind of relates to this topic that at this conference there's going to be lots of people talking about the whats and the hows, but they also forget about the why. And it's all really important to start with why you want to be using SharePoint, why you want to be integrating your data sources, those kinds of things. So if you take nothing else from this presentation, it's a really good book. I suggest you go and buy it and have a read. So, I found the best way for people to remember things is through stories. As I always remember Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and things like that. So, to go through our little history lesson, we're going to have a little story. And I found stories always need to have dragons, kittens and Star Wars in for people to find them interesting. So I've managed to build these into our little story somehow. So in the beginning, in our company, say 15 years ago, they decided that HR needed an SAP project to run their HR portal and do payroll and all that kind of stuff. So they built a little tent called SAP and had all their data in there, and HR were happy. And about 5 years later, finance decided they needed some application to store their financial data in the work they were doing. So they built their own little TP called Oracle and put all their data in there and went away, and they were happy as well. And then at a later date, some customers' relationship management thing was put in, and that uses SQL Server to store its data. So we've got these three different TPs of information. It's difficult to share the information between these different systems. It's difficult to get a unique view. You have to go to different user interfaces to get to the different data sources to view the data. Then we have different authentication systems, all kinds of problems that it's termed islands of data. I like TPs of data just to be a bit different. So then our castle came along, which was SharePoint Server 2007. And this gave us the opportunity, people were deploying SharePoint 2007 for document management and collaboration and things like that. But one of the great things that came with SharePoint 2007 was the Business Data Catalog. So now not only were people able to store their documents and collaborate, they were also able to use SharePoint as a place to go to view all the different data from these different data sources, from SAP, from Oracle, and from SQL Server. And I don't think you can see that they're a light blue on there, but the arrows are going, our data is going from SQL Server, SAP, and Oracle into SharePoint 2007 through the Business Data Catalog. The problem was this big dragon called XML. And for SharePoint to know about your data source, you had to define this thing called an application definition file, which basically told SharePoint how are you going to connect to your back-end system. It would define these things called entities, which were things like customers, orders, and products. And it was a big, long XML file that Microsoft were expecting you to open Notepad and go and create yourself until they came out with a little bit of tooling later on. So the big dragon was XML. So luckily, BDC MetaMan came along, and this was the night. slayed the dragon. And BDC Metaman was one of the tools that I developed and worked on. And it was a visual user interface for dragging and dropping tables on, and it press play and it would spit out all the XML for you and go and configure it. And you just import that into the SharePoint SSP and configure the business data catalog, and away you went. So life was good, and the happy cats were happy. This will probably be Steve on Friday, and the conference is finally finished and all the sessions are done. But yeah, we were all happy. The business data catalog was working quite well. We were able to get our information in from different data sources, and people could just go to their SharePoint site, view Oracle, view SAP, view SQL Server. Things were good. So what did the business data catalog give us, though, once we'd integrated it? Well, there are a number of web parts. If we wanted to build up a dashboard that showed our customers and then display filtered orders once we selected a customer, we could quite easily, once our customers and orders had been defined in our application definition file, just put these web parts on our page and go and set the web parts to bring back the data from these different sources. So it gave the user the power to do that once our entities were defined. There was a business data column as well. So if you had a list of customers in your database and you wanted to tag your documents with specific customers, it was easy to create a business data column and then go and select a customer from the data entity picker and say, I want this document to be tagged with metadata for about this customer. Really easy. Search was powerful as well. So rather than having to go to separate applications to search within Oracle or SAP, you could just search within SharePoint, and SharePoint would display all the information from your line of business systems. The user profiles. So my sites would pull information from Active Directory, such as people's phone numbers or their managers, those kind of things. But quite a few organizations had a separate HR system that would store this information, such as a phone number. So rather than having to replicate that information from Siebel or something like that over to Active Directory, you could actually have a business data catalog application definition file that would pull the information from your HR system, merge it with Active Directory, and populate the My Site Your Profile information with that merged information, which was a lot easier. And there's also an object model as well. So if you did have developers that wanted to write custom solutions, rather than having to learn separate APIs, so an API for SAP or an API for Oracle, they could just learn the business data catalog object model. And once you've defined all these different data sources to be used through the business data catalog, they could just query the business data catalog through the object model and get the different data from all these different data sources. So that's quite powerful. But things were all good and people were generally happy, but as soon as they started getting data from their back-end data sources into SharePoint, they were kind of saying, well, it's in SharePoint now, but we need to write it back as well to our data source. How are we going to go about doing that? So there were some options in SharePoint 2007. The Business Data Catalog was part of Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007 Enterprise Edition. And if you had Enterprise Edition, it meant you had form services. So you could go and build an InfoPath form, publish it as a browser-enabled form, link through it through BDC Actions so that when people are looking at a certain bit of data, they could click on an edit link and it would pop up that browser-enabled InfoPath form for you. You could go and edit it and post it back. Again, it takes custom development with InfoPath, perhaps web services as well, depending on where you're writing back to, but it was an option. There are also custom web parts as well. So again, if you've got developers, they could write some custom web parts that would be able to write back. You could link through again. And again, with BDC Metaman, we helped out a little bit by generating some web parts as well. So you could say, I want to write back to this data source. These are the columns I want to write back. And BDC Metaman will go and generate a C# project for you that you could then go and deploy or customize to whatever way you wanted. So there were options for writing back, but it certainly wasn't out of the box, and it wasn't particularly easy. So a little time went by. Microsoft listened to everyone's feedback, what they were trying to do with the business data catalog, and finally we've got the business connectivity services. So the business connectivity services is what's available in SharePoint 2007 now. One of the big things to notice is we've got a new icon down in the bottom right here of SharePoint Foundation. So SharePoint Foundation is the new version of Windows SharePoint Services. It's been renamed to SharePoint Foundation. And the great news is that BCS is part of SharePoint Foundation. So previously, when you had to have the Enterprise Edition of SharePoint Server 2007 to get any of this integration functionality, now it's available in SharePoint Foundation, the free version, and SharePoint Server 2010. Now, this is quite a big issue with 2007 because people would be doing proof of concept work where they just download, say, the trial of 2007 Enterprise Edition, go and configure the business data catalog, get everything working the way they wanted to, and the company would say, yeah, let's go with that, that's really cool. Then they go to the licensing people, and the licensing people would say, you're going to need enterprise cows for this because it's the enterprise edition, and that will kind of put a roadblock in the way sometimes. So the fact it's available now to a lot more people is really exciting. Again, the arrows are a little bit light blue rather than don't stand out, but you can see they're going both ways. So we can now write back to our data sources out of the box, which is really great. There's no need to write custom web parts, no need to build info path forms anymore. If you define the correct methods within your external content types or entities, I'll explain that in a second, you'll be able to pull data through and also write it back to that data source as well. So I got right back. So, a few acronym changes. As I said, Microsoft like their acronyms, and this time they've invented some new ones and also changed the meanings of some existing ones. So in 2007, the 2007 stuff is down the left-hand side. So BDC in 2007 was Business Data Catalog, which was the integration piece to integrate your back-end data sources. In 2010, BDC stands for Business Data Connectivity. Okay? And BCS stands for Business Connectivity Services. Now, I'll have a look in a diagram in a second that business data connectivity is actually just a connectivity layer, whereas the BCS is the whole UI, the whole piece of the pie, the whole connectivity story. Okay? Generally, we just refer to it as the business connectivity services because by using BDC, people get quite easily confused and start thinking you're talking about 2007 again. But within the Microsoft documentation on the SDK, it does say BDC quite often, and they're referring to the particular connectivity piece. Okay? In 2007, we had entities. Now, entities were our real-world objects that we had to define, such as customers, orders, products, those kind of things. These are now called external content types, so ECTs. There's also enterprise content types, which are ECTs as well, which will get confused if people are using acronyms. So yeah, just be aware of that. When we show some of the functionality around external lists, it will make sense why they're called external content types now, which is really good. And again, within the user interface, around certain bits of the admin user interface, and also the object model, they're still referred to as entities. But within most of the end user interface, they're referred to as external content types. Application definition files. So these were the big chunks of XML that we had to write to define what our data source was and how we're going to connect to it. These are now called models. And finally, single sign-on service. So this was how we could use a single sign-on service to delegate how our users were going to connect to different back-end systems. This is now called SSS, which is a secure store service. Okay, basically the same thing, does the same job, just a bit of a name change. Okay. Some big wins that we've got now. These are the investments that Microsoft have made within the business connectivity services, a bit of SharePoint 2010 that we're going to benefit from. First of all, as we've already said, SharePoint Foundation gets the business connectivity services. And again, this is just going to open up the integration part of the story to lots and lots of people. The write back is available out of the box, so there's no need to develop these custom web parts or info path forms now. As long as we define the correct methods for our external content types or entities, then you'll be able to write back to your data system. We now have external lists. And external lists are really cool, and they're probably one of the big investment or the bits that I'm most excited about. So an external list looks like a normal SharePoint list to the end user, but it's actually using an external content type to pull the information through from your back-end system and populate it into the list. So now you can see why an external list, an external content type, kind of makes sense, because a normal list makes use of a content type, and an external list can make use of an external content type. So to the end user, it looks like they're looking at a normal SharePoint list. They can add new items to a SharePoint list. They can update them, edit them, whatever they want. But actually, when they're adding or editing an external list, they're actually editing data in the back-end system, so whether it be Oracle or SQL Server. This is good because users know how to use SharePoint lists. They know how to edit items, add new items. It's also good from a developer point of view as well, and other areas of SharePoint. Because it's just a list, in effect, other areas of functionality, such as lookup columns, can look up to this external list. If you're a developer and you're using the SharePoint list object model, you can write code that looks to a SharePoint list. Now, that could be a SharePoint list, or it could be a SharePoint external list. your code can really, it makes it a lot more flexible of what your actual components can do by using external lists, or using lists, and they could just happen to be an external list. The BCS is now a service application. So for the admins around, we used to have a shared service provider that had the business data catalog, my site search, all those kind of things. And if you just wanted to set up the BDC or the business data catalog, you kind of had these extra bits bolted on. But now with the fidelity of having everything as a service application, you can just create a BCS service application and just have that defined to the particular web applications you want. So you no longer have all the extra bits tied on necessarily, such as the search and the profiles, all that kind of stuff. It's a lot more granular of setting up applications. Another big one from a developer aspect is having .NET Assembly as a data source. Previously with the business data catalog, you could have SQL Server, Oracle, ODBC and web services as where you're going to be pulling your data from. Now these four options are still existed, and there's some additions there, but .NET Assembly, now what you can do is write some C# code and actually have your model look at your .NET Assembly and pull data through from that .NET Assembly. Now this is really cool because with the business data catalog, you could only define, say, an entity pulling data from SQL Server and through. But now, because you can write a .NET Assembly and write any code, you can have your C# code pulling data from Oracle and from SQL Server, merging it together, transforming it in any way you want to, and then the business connectivity services is going to look at that .NET Assembly and pull data from the .NET Assembly that's merged and transformed. So if you've got developers that are writing code and able to interface with your systems, it's really, really powerful. And there's a session tomorrow that I'm doing, a deep dive, that will look at building a .NET Assembly as a data source. And also Phil Duffy's got a session later in the afternoon, again a deep dive, that will be looking into the .NET Assemblies even deeper. So if that's something that's interesting to you, I'd suggest looking at it. The tooling has been a big investment. So before, where we had to use Notepad or BDC MetaMan, you can now use SharePoint Designer, and because we're doing .NET Assemblies as data sources, you can also use Visual Studio to define your models. We're going to take a look at SharePoint Designer today. So we'll see how to create external content types in SharePoint Designer, and then again we'll look at the Visual Studio tooling tomorrow. So the tooling's really good, that's a lot more improved. There's also Office Client integration as well. So there was a tiny bit of integration last time around Word, where you could use a document information panel and tag the document with metadata. But now, Office is actually kind of a client of the business connectivity services. So you can take data offline. If you're using Outlook, you can take the data into Outlook, such as calendars, contacts, items, those kind of things, and they will actually appear in Outlook as though they are actual calendar items and contacts as well. So again, your users can be working with contacts. Again, in Outlook, they'll look like normal contacts. We can edit them, add new contacts, those kind of things. But those contacts, because they're going through the BCS, can actually be written back to your back-end data system. Word makes use of the external data as well in terms of, I can't remember the word now, quick parts, that's it. So you can insert the actual BCS data into your documents now. We'll do a demo of that. And also there's SharePoint Workspace as well. So SharePoint Workspace is a new version of Groove. So an external list within your SharePoint site, you can now take that external list offline into SharePoint Workspace, disconnect, go away with your external, work with your external list. The traveling salesperson is always a good example where they take product list offline, go to sales sites, do their sales, come back online, reconnect, and it'll sync up and push that data back through. Okay, see how we're doing with time. So this is the BCS platform. This is just a quick look to show where the BDC kind of bit fits into it, and also how SharePoint and Office is actually a client of the BDC. So we can see here the whole thing is the business connectivity services. But the BDC, the business data connectivity, is just this segment here. So it's only concerned with how it's going to connect to the different data sources. Okay. So it's quite interesting to see that SharePoint is actually a client of the BDC, as is Office also a client of the BDC. And the whole thing together is a business connectivity service, as we said. You'll notice that the BDC on here is a different segment to what's used by Office. And now with the business connectivity services, there's actually two object models. There's the client object model, which is used by Word and those kind of things, the Office applications. And then there's also the server object model, which is going to be used by SharePoint. So when you're writing solutions, you're going to need to think about whether your BCS data is going to be used on the client in Word and Outlook, those kind of things, or whether it's going to be used on the server in terms of web parts. And that'll dictate then which kind of assembly you're going to use to interface with the BCS. Okay, so what do we get in SharePoint Foundation? So again, SharePoint Foundation is the free version of SharePoint this time around. The good news is we get external lists, which are one of the new powerful things. We get external data columns. We get a business data connectivity shared service. That's just the kind of application service that the whole BCS is going to run around anyway. So, yeah, that just says that we get the functionality. And also the connector framework as well. So this is obviously you need to be able to connect your data sources to pull the data through. So it's got the connector framework for that. The external lists, the look and feel we've kind of gone through. So feeling like a normal SharePoint list. There's some important things that, although they look and feel like a normal SharePoint list, there's some important functionality that's missing from external lists that are available in SharePoint lists. They kind of make sense when you think about it. So there's workflows, alerts, RSS feeds, folders, and attachments. So the workflows and alerts kind of make sense when you think about it. So if we've got our external list here, which is interfacing with our data source, this data source here can, of course, have an existing application that's already talking to it. So this existing application can still make changes to the external data source, and because SharePoint, the external list, won't know about those changes, it's difficult for it to know when a new item of data has been added to be able to kick off a workflow. Because this external list only looks at the data when the user actually goes to the page and refreshes the page or whatever. It's impossible. There's no polling thing going on, has Oracle changed, has Oracle changed, has Oracle changed. So it makes sense. The workflows, with an external list, you can't kick off a new workflow, as in when a new item gets added, and there's no update workflow. But if you've got a workflow that's, say, being started by a shared documents library or something like that, that can look up data in an external list. So it's just an external list can't kick off workflows. And it's the same with alerts again. SharePoint in the background isn't going and checking its data source every 10 seconds to see if a new record has been added to send out an alert. So it's impossible for an external list to be able to do alerts. There's no way saying a developer couldn't go and write its own a new service application that can do this kind of thing, but it's not available out of the box.
Versioning? Is versioning there?
No, that's not either. So SharePoint Server 2010, you can see we get some extra functionality here, as you would expect, built on top of SharePoint Foundation. So we get the external data web parts. These are kind of the same web parts that are available in SharePoint 2007 for building up dashboards. We get profile pages, so that's used in search, and if you click through on a row of data, it takes you to the profile page, and you can see the full record of information. External data search, and again, secure store service for doing a single sign-on. The interesting bit is the rich client extensions. So if you do want to be taking data offline in Outlook, your external data, you can only do that if you're using SharePoint Server 2010. It's not going to be available in SharePoint Foundation. Okay, so the external data web parts, we said, pretty much the same, except they've got caching this time. Profile pages are quite interesting because with a profile page, you generally have, say, a business data list web part that would show, say, 3 or 4 columns of rows of data. Maybe like name, first name, postcode, and address. If you wanted to see more information about that particular customer, you'd click on the link, and it would take you through to the profile page, and it could show you the full information about that record of data. Now, the profile pages, by default, are always created within the shared service provider application, the web application, which was a different web application to where the BDC web parts were. And when people clicked through to them, it was really difficult for the user to get back to where they were. And it would be a different URL, possibly with a port number on and all those kind of annoying things. And people were generally confused. What's good now is you can actually, and you must, set the location within the BCS service application of where you want these profile pages to be created. So you can now get them created within the same web application, so it's a lot easier for your users to navigate around, and they don't get confused and lost with port numbers on the URL, that kind of thing. So that's a good change. And as we said, the rich client extension, if you want to take your data offline, then you're going to need SharePoint Server, so SharePoint Foundation won't include that functionality.
Will that only work with Office 2010 as well?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so the tooling as we've gone through, this is where the little Star Wars reference comes into, if you remember the story. This is where I managed to sneak it in. The lightsabers. So SharePoint Designer is the first part of the tooling that we're going to look at today, and we'll be able to create basic external content types from SQL Server, .NET types, and WCF services. Visual Studio 2010 is a bit more powerful, or a lot more powerful, I should say, because C# code, your developers will tell you they can rule the world by writing C# code. So anything your developer can do to bring data through and transform it, and SharePoint can then pull it through. So again, it's really powerful. The problem with the Visual Studio 2010 is it does require you to learn a bit of the BCS model underlying, as in terms of when you're writing the XML files before, you had to write all the type descriptors, those kind of things. You do still, if you're using Visual Studio, you have to understand that because you have to build the model up yourself. If you're going to be doing it a lot, that's fine. It's a good thing to learn anyway. So BCS MetaMan is a new tool that we're building that will work inside Visual Studio. And it will have the same kind of thing where you can drag and drop a table on, and now it's going to generate the model for you, and it's also going to generate all the C# code for you as well. So it takes a lot of the grunt work out that you'll have to do manually. So we've got it on the Lightning Tools website as a beta now, so I should suggest you check it out. Before we get into demo, it's the last slide, I think. So using data in Office clients, when we go and define our external content type in SharePoint Designer, you'll see there's a new drop-down called Office Business Types. When you're defining your external content type, you can say, I want this external content type to be the Office Business type of calendar, appointment, task, or note. And when you do that, and when you want to take it offline, that's how Outlook knows that this particular external content type is going to be of a calendar type or is going to be of a task type, those kind of things. So you need to go through the process of actually mapping the fields in your database through to Office Business type fields. So you need to map the first name of your customer through to the first name of the Office Business type, the email address, and so on and so forth. If you've got lots of fields, it can take quite a long time because you don't realize it when you look at all the list of fields that Outlook has. There's quite a few of them, but it's easy to do. They're all listed there for you, and we'll go through the process of doing that. Word 2010, the metadata and quick parts. The metadata of how to choose the actual row of data that you want to be associated with that document has improved a lot. Before, you had to actually know the ID of the record that you wanted to bring back, unfortunately, in the document information panel. And if your rows of data had a GUID as their ID column, trying to remember a GUID of a particular customer was nigh on impossible. So now it's actually got the entity data picker now, so it will pop up within Word, and you can choose which actual row of data you want rather than having to remember an ID number. And also the quick parts are really cool as well, so being able to embed the BCS data within your document and so on. And finally, the SharePoint workspaces, as we said, so if you need to take your data offline, if you're in a traveling salesperson environment, you can take the external lists offline, go away, go and do your sales, come back online, and it will sync up and process all those, push all that information back to your external system for you. Okay, so demo time. I'm going to have to sit down as well, so because it makes it a bit easier. But if anybody's got a question, feel free to shout out or cough loudly as well, and we'll come round. So when you're doing the external content types within SharePoint Designer, which is what I've got open here, SharePoint Designer, there is quite a lot to configure, unfortunately, and because the resolution on things switches to 800 by 600, it does make it really, really cramped. So I'll move around as slowly as I can, but if someone misses something, just feel free to shout out, and I'll try and navigate to the right bit and change it. So I've opened up SharePoint Designer, and I've connected to my HTTP local host, just a home site. And you'll see down the left-hand side now, we've got the navigation of all the different objects we can interact with. And we now have external content types listed here. So if we click on external content types, you'll see we've got two external content types already created. We've got a department external content type and a product external content type as well. But SharePoint Designer gets the whole ribbon experience, so once we've got external content type selected, we can go and click to create a new external content type here. And you'll notice here, this is the area now, let's move this out of the way a bit, that we'll work with to create our external content type. Okay, so we need to give it a name. We'll just call this one contacts or contact. There's versioning. Identified, you don't need to worry about at the moment because it'll automatically configure that. Now this is the Office item type. So this is where we want to say whether it's a generic list, or whether it's an appointment, a contact, a task, or a post. So we'll choose this one to be contact. So this will appear in Outlook as a normal contact. And also you can set whether you want it to be enabled for being able to take it offline as an external list. So if you don't want your users taking data away in SharePoint Workspace, it's quite easy to turn off to stop them doing that. We'll leave that as enabled for now. And what we want to do is discover our external system that we want to connect to. So once we click on that, it will change tabs. Now I've already connected to AdventureWorks, my database here. But if I was to click Add New Connection, if there weren't any previous connections there, then it will pop up and show you what type of connection do you want to connect to. And in SharePoint Designer, you can choose a .NET type, so that's the .NET assembly, where you've written C# code, a SQL Server database, or a WCF service. So the .NET type is interesting because the .NET type actually has to be pre-built in Visual Studio 2010 and already deployed as well. You can't build it and deploy it in SharePoint Designer. But with SharePoint Designer, you can kind of go and configure it to a certain degree of more granularity within SharePoint Designer and in an easier way than in Visual Studio. So quite often your developers will go and build the .NET assembly, deploy it, and then you can go and customize it a bit more in SharePoint Designer. We've already got our data source here, so if we select AdventureWorks, I should have a list of tables available now. Let's try and remove connections and see what happens. So I'll try SQL Server. Unfortunately, this little bit here, where it's kind of not expanded, is where it should show the data source and all the list of tables that are available. How can I work around that? Okay, let's go see if we can edit an existing external content type, and that may show us. We'll do products. So this is our products external content type that we've already created. And you'll see, under external content type operations, we've got all the different methods that we've created for this external content type. So for those who were familiar with the Business Data Catalog, you had the Finder method and the specific Finder method. In SharePoint Designer, these are called read list, which is the Finder method, and read item, which is a specific Finder one. If we go and try double-clicking on one and see if it brings it up. Okay, so on the previous little pane that I couldn't open, it would have a list of tables there available to you, and views and stored procedures. And you could right-click on one of the tables and choose which operations you want to build, and then it will kind of take you into this window. So from this window, we can then go and configure the methods that we want for our external content type and map the properties, the fields that are coming back to the Office business type as well. So if we just click next here, we can choose to add filter parameters. So if we want to add any filters, there's this new filter called a limit type. So quite often with the Business Data Catalog, your developers or administrators will go and set it up to bring, say, a products list through. But the products list would have, say, 2 million records in or something like that. And kind of the end user will be like, why is my page taking ages to load or bring back the data? And it's because really you don't want to be bringing 2 million rows of data back and try and display it within a web page. So now there's a new type of filter called a limit filter. So you can limit it, say, and only bring back the top 200 records, and the page will load a lot quicker. The problem is if you set a limit filter up, say, and only bring back the top 200, it's only ever going to bring back the top 200 records. So always make sure that if you're going to use a limit filter, add another type of filter where it'll filter it by name or by number or something like that, so your users can get access to that data. Okay, so this is where you can select which columns you actually want to be bringing back from your table. So here you can see we can select which columns we want to bring back. We're bringing back them all. If we go down to... Okay, bear with me. Fortunately, because I can't connect to that contact type, I was going to show you how to map it to the Outlook fields. Okay. Let me go start again. Okay, this might work. So we're back in the product one again. Because it was set as a generic list, I'm going to set it as a contact. A product obviously isn't going to be a contact, but it'll just let me show you how you map the fields. So, oh no, because I didn't finish creating that thing. It's going to let me do it. Okay, we tried departments. Give me 1 second. If I unplug this, it will go back to normal resolution. I'll create a contact one, and we'll go from there, because that'll make it so much nicer and better. So, okay, so this is the operations thing. I've gone and right-clicked on the employees table and said I want to create all operations. Now it's telling me you can create the create operation, the read item, the update, the delete list, and the delete and the read list. Now if you don't want your users to be able to create or insert data, you obviously don't want to create the create method or the update method. So that's how you can go through and stop them from writing back to your system necessarily. But we're happy to go and create all these different types of methods. So this is where we can go through. So these are all the columns that are available in our employee table. The first name, first of all, the employee ID. So the employee ID is going to be the identifier because it's the primary key. Also, you can also set it as a read-only field. So when people are going and updating this record, you don't want them going and changing the primary key field. So if you set it to read-only, it won't be there as a field that they can go and edit, which is good. You can also set it as a required field as well. So there's a little bit of validation here. If you want to make first name a required field, you can go and set that as required. It's quite good as well because if the database has got a field that can't be nullable, or can't be null, it will go through and set it as a required field for you automatically. So the office business type bit we wanted to see, the first name, we will see the office property. Again, in such a low resolution, oh, it does show it, thank God. These are all the different office properties that you can get for contacts within Outlook. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of them. Quite a lot of them you never even knew existed, perhaps. But we just want to go and map a few ones. So we'll say first name obviously maps to first name. Last name will map to last name. Oops. And the only other one we'll do is email address. Maps to email. Okay, so now when you go and open this in Outlook, it would show as a normal contact type, the first name maps to the first name, surname and email address really nicely. Okay. Again, the filter thing, it suggests that we go and add a filter, but we won't worry about that one because we know there's not too much data being brought back. So we click Finish. You would then see for our contact type, it's gone and said we've gone and created the various methods that our external contact type can use. So we can then go and save it. And this is actually going to deploy it to our business data connectivity metadata store, as it says here. So as soon as we press the Save button, it goes and deploys it to SharePoint. Okay, so if we look at external content types now, we can see our external content type is there. If we want to go and create an external list from this, we can either do it through the SharePoint user interface, or we can actually right-click here and choose to create an external list from here itself. So I'm going to click to create an external list. I'll call this just contacts. Click OK. And that's gone and created the external list for us. So if we now go to our SharePoint site, again, the resolution's a bit small, but we have down here in our lists, contacts. Now, if we click on it, what's kind of interesting is access is denied by the business data connectivity. Now, I'm running on a build that's slightly later than Beta 2. In Beta 2, if you deployed an external content type, it automatically gave you permissions to use that external content type. With this slightly later build, you can actually deploy an external content type, but it doesn't give you permissions to use it yet. It's quite confusing. What you need to do is actually go into the service application and say that Nick has got permissions to use this external content type. Just something worth bearing in mind. Whether that will be there in RTM or not, or whether they revert back to the way it was in Beta 2, you'll soon find out, I guess. So within central administration, we need to go to our managed service applications and business data connectivity services, and our contact, set permissions, and you'll see here there's no permissions have been set for anyone. We just scroll down. You can see the kind of pros and cons of this. Just because they've created an external content type, they may not actually have access to the data. But for demos and things like that, it's a bit annoying. So we need to say that they can edit, execute, selectable in client, set permissions for that particular external content type. And just click OK. And now again, if you're just playing around with this, and you click and refresh now, and it still says access denied, it's because the settings are actually cached. So I say that, we'll soon find out if they are or whether it's just wrong. So by clicking refresh a number of times, the cache should eventually clear, and then those new permissions will be available. And I should be able to access the data. There's no way I've found, unfortunately, to kind of force the cache to clear either, so. I do have a backup. Okay. We'll presume that that does eventually clear, or we might come back to it later and have a little look. But the, let's just hope I didn't break these by removing the methods. Okay. So this is our product list. So this was based off the external content type, the product external content type that we saw. And this is just an external list that's built off that external content type. So we can see here when we select a particular row of data, the ribbon at the top will change for us, which is quite nice. And because we created the creator and the update method on our external content type, we have the ability now to be able to click to insert a new item or edit the item. And there was nothing extra I had to do around here. All I had to do was create that external content type. There's no configuration of these pages or anything. Clicking on Edit Item loads up a particular view. And you can see down here all the different fields that we can go through and edit and change. So if I go and change the adjustable race to adjustable race Nick and go and save it, you can see that was a required field as well because it had a little red star against it. You can see it's edited and updated in our SharePoint list as we'd expect it to. But that's also written straight back now to our SQL Server database as well. So it's gone through and changed the external system for us. Okay, taking offline. Excuse me. Yeah, sure.
What's the, if that's talking about to a database, does it still involve in sort of the transaction model, the standard database connection?
Well, the transaction thing, I guess, in my definition of a transaction, it would be where it's trying to write back, say, multiple records involved with the same say you'd have a product and then, customer and 3 orders for that thing. Whereas an entity or an external content type is really just one order or one customer or one type of object. So whether you'd need transactional kind of workflow in that, I don't know. If you did, I mean, this is just going straight from an external list to a model, which is the XML, straight to SQL Server. So if you did need to build in any extra logic, the way to go would be to go through either a .NET assembly and have the logic in the code and the whole transaction in the code, or through a WS service and again have the transactional logic within the WCF service. So let's just see if our contacts thing did update and the permissions changed. No. No. Okay, so let's go to our departments list, and we'll look at the list. And we can see we've, along the ribbon, under the connect and export, again, because we're in such a narrow resolution, it's grouped the buttons together. If we're on a wider screen, it would have these buttons as individual buttons. But under the connect and export thing for the external list, you can see we've got a connect to Outlook button and also sync to SharePoint workspaces as well. So the connect to Outlook button, once you click on that, that's going to package up this external list and the assembly and the information that's needed if need be into a click once deployment package, and actually ask the client then if they want to install it on their system. Once they install it, that's then going to make that data available within Outlook. I've got to say, I'm running on Windows 7 here, and with Outlook 2010 installed, I've never been able to get the Connect to Outlook button to work just installed on Windows 7. If I've got a proper setup of like a proper farm with clients and Active Directory and things, it works perfectly. Just installed on Windows 7, it doesn't quite work, so I won't click on that button. But you know what contacts look like in Outlook anyway, it just looks like a normal contact, so it's not really that exciting. The sync to SharePoint Workspace, again, if we click on that, because I've already done this and gone through and actually clicked on it as part of preparing for the demo in case something went wrong with our contacts list, which it did, when you click on that for the first time, again, it will package it up as a click once deployment package, and it will ask you, do you want to install this to your local system? And if you click yes, it will go and install it, and it will make that data available as an external list. So you can see here, this is our department external list. All the data's here as we'd expect. We can simply go and click on it, and again, it brings up this form for us to be able to edit it. We'll change it to engineering and design. Click on save and close. And again, if we go, that's SharePoint Workspace, so SharePoint Workspace will write back directly to our data source. If we go and check our list, we'll see it's gone and changed engineering and design as well. So it's just a demonstration of how you can use SharePoint Workspace if you need to take the data offline and work in an offline scenario. The final thing I want to show you was Word 2010. So I've created a document library here that's already got a business data column already set up for it. So we're bringing back some product information to do with each Word document. So we're tagging each document with information about a particular product. So if we go and click on adjustable race, I'll do it in edit mode. You can see here, ball bearing is actually, once I click on enable editing, and I'll close the navigation pane to give us a bit more room. Ball bearing is actually a quick part. So this is actually metadata that's being pulled through from the external data system. So we can actually click on select external items, and we can actually choose the data straight from SQL Server or Oracle, whichever the data system is. We'll choose headset bearings. Click OK, and you can see that's brought back the headset bearings as the one data we want to choose. What's interesting, once you've chosen a particular row of data, we can insert, it's not under links, is it? There you go. Under text again, this will be more expanded at higher resolution, which is why I have to look around for it. Under quick parts, document property, you can see under the document property, you can actually pull back all the other fields from our metadata that we've selected. So we can say, in this particular field, if you'll let me drag and drop it. So I'm going to put it in there. I'm going to put the colour, and I should do. So it should have updated and set the colour now. Let's try and select a new row. It's because there isn't one, that's why. Typical. Let's select another field and see if it brings that back. Standard cost. Standard cost, that's got a standard cost, so if we select that, then we'll see there it actually brings back the product name, which is the one that we've selected, and also the standard cost as well. So it can bring back all the different associated fields for that particular row of data. Okay. I'm just going all the way back to the beginning. So, do it this time. There we go. So a roundup of what we've covered today. Again, this is just an intro really to some various bits of the BCS, the kind of investments that have been made. We'll go into more detail tomorrow in the 2 deep dive sessions. So the big things that I've picked out really are that BCS is going to be available in SharePoint Foundation, which opens up this functionality to a lot more people. Aren't necessarily invested in SharePoint Server product, but SharePoint Foundation. The write back, as we've seen, we've not had to write any code or anything like that to do the write back. We've just configured our external content type within SharePoint Designer, deployed it, and it generates automatically all the forms for us to be able to insert and update new data. The Office Client integration is cool, and also the .NET Assembly as data sources. So this is what we're going to dig into in a lot more detail tomorrow. So bringing data from SQL Server and a web service and merging it together into one external content type and showing that within SharePoint. And we'll write some code to show you how to do that. Other than that, thanks very much for attending, and feel free to ask any questions if you've got any. Yeah.
How will packaging the deployment of these artifacts that are created in SharePoint Designer differ from standard content types, for instance?
So quite different really. The external content types, they kind of get broken down by the BCS service when you're going to import them into a database. So you can go and look into the service database, and it's got a properties table and a lob system table and all that kind of stuff. And so it's basically, it'll take the XML, split it all up, and put it into the various fields within the database. If you're deploying an assembly with your model to do a .NET Assembly write C# code, that will go in the global assembly cache. And so the BCS model or the BCS will then be calling the assembly in the global assembly cache.
So in terms of the process of transitioning these between environments,
Yeah.
I think we create something in dev. How do we actually move forward to
Yeah. So you can, SharePoint Designer stuff, you can just export the model, because it's just XML that SharePoint Designer creates, and import it straight through the service application if need be. Visual Studio creates a WSP. So your model and your assembly will be included in that WSP, so then you can just go and deploy that as you want. So yeah, that's quite good. Yeah. That'll take this one, yeah.
What about your entity has related tables? So say, for example, your department, sorry, the department groups there.
Yeah.
How easy is it to build something slightly more sophisticated so that, when you're editing a department, you can have a look up for a selected department group?
Yeah, it's not particularly easy out of the box. I mean, creating associations is easy because we could do that in the business data catalog, okay. But in terms of lookup stuff, that's a bit more tricky. The forms themselves, I think they're info path forms, so you should be able to edit them in SharePoint Designer or within an info path to kind of put that functionality in if you need to be.
Another BCS entity that you're actually bringing in to look up.
Yeah, I mean, we've been asked it a number of times already from people that are just trying out the BCS, so it's going to be a common thing. So I'm sure there'll be a blog post up there of how to do it soon, yeah.
Could you use a view in sequels to create that data before you bring it in?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Yeah.
Before you bring it in, you bring that information in.
Yes. Yeah, I think the question here is more related to if, I'm just trying to think of an example. If you have got a product and you want to select a particular order, you've got one product and 10 orders, and you want to say this, have a drop down then of the orders rather than having to type in an ID of that particular order, that kind of thing. It's going to be a common scenario, so we'll have a solution for it if it's not available out of the box. I haven't tried it, so we'll find out. Yeah.
Question about sort of caching. In 2007, if you had a custom column from BBC, you put data in it and then it changed, but it never really reflected back through the list. Does 2010 solve that problem?
No, it's the same scenario. So again, if you're using the external business data column, it's saving that data within the document library or the list or whatever. So you'll see there's still a little refresh button at the top that you need to click on refresh and it'll go and get all the data. Again, you could write a service application or a timer job or whatever and go and refresh it programmatically, but it's not out of the box, I'm afraid. Yep. Okay, well, thanks very much for attending and enjoy the rest of the conference.